really digging it out. You could be there half day. That's on the road. Typically, yeah.
Chief Adams, you know we already approved your memo, right?
I don't mind hanging out with them.
Okay, just making sure.
The regular grading, I mean, yeah, really driving the graders, yeah. Yeah, they keep back and forth at times too, but.
Just scroll, just scroll.
But it's not always in the grapple. Right.
So Katie knows that she's presenting this on her first day? Okay.
You're alive, sir?
Richard, we're live. Are you ready to go?
We're ready. Are you ready?
I'm ready. No. Okay, good evening. The hour being 7:20 p.m., I'd like to call to order the Brookfield Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, May 23rd, 2022. Could we have a roll call, Bridget?
Trustee Ketchmark?
Here?
Trustee Cote?
Here.
Trustee Hendricks?
Here.
Trustee Conroy?
Here.
Trustee Leclerc?
Here.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Here.
And President Garvey.
Here. Thank you very much, Bridget. We have two items on our agenda tonight. The first is a discussion of the Energize Ogden plan. Emily, you're going to take the lead on this?
Yes, thank you, President Garvey. Thank you, President Garvey. Tonight we have a presentation for the Energize Ogden. It has been a long time coming. We've been working very diligently with Kimley Horn on this project. We're excited to bring it to you tonight. This is Daniel Grove from Kimley Horn, part of the team from Kimley Horn that's been working on this, and we'll jump right into it.
Thank you for being here tonight, Dan. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Daniel Grove. I'm a planner and landscape architect with Kimley Horn and part of the team that was lucky enough to be able to work on this corridor. Just want to walk you through a little bit on the process that we went through, the kind of the character of the corridor, what we see out there, and the issues and opportunities that come along with that. And then this series of toolkits that we're recommending to move forward, and just some of the priority actions and next steps that we see as coming out of this process. So if we go to the next two slides, I guess. Just talking a little bit about our process. One, this is really heavily based in working with the community. We had two public workshops, given that it was the pandemic. One was completely virtual, the other we held here and had a virtual and an in-person component. We got really good response. We followed each of those up with online surveys and had over 300 people participating. Appreciate staff helping out, getting the word out, making sure that we were getting people aware and engaged. But we went through that process. We went through stakeholder interviews and walked the corridor multiple times and really worked to get our arms around what is Ogden Avenue in Brookfield. Through that we did analysis on kind of the character of the land use, the conditions of the parking lots, the buildings, the signage, the pavements, to really kind of understand what's happening from an operational and aesthetic standpoint in the corridor. We also had SB Friedman on to help us with some market analysis to kind of understand the types of businesses that are out there and talking to developers and understanding what some of the market pressures are and the desires for the corridor as well. So that was another component and piece that was helpful in this process. From all that, we came together and put together a series of concepts looking at what could be done, to enhance the corridor and help the corridor over time. And, that can range from small things that each business owner can do up to larger initiatives for the village itself. And so we put together those concepts. We brought those to that second workshop to get some input from the community and helped to refine those, and then ultimately worked towards a series of 8 toolkits. Early on in the process when we were envisioning this, we see a lot of communities where the final document is a big report that sits on a shelf, and ultimately that's not what we thought was most beneficial for the community here. Especially with a corridor, and I'll get into this in a minute, there's unique challenges, and you can't, there's no one silver bullet that's going to address the corridor. And so we saw this as a series of smaller initiatives that village staff can work on, that individual property owners and business owners can work on over the next series of years. And we wanted to create these toolkits as a way to provide guidance and resources to help make those decisions and help move it forward. I think it's going to be a lot of a few catalytic projects, and I'll talk on that in a second, but a lot of incremental steps as well that's going to turn, keep Ogden Avenue moving in a way where I think the vision is for a really vibrant and vital corridor for Brookfield. So with that, just talk a little bit about the character. First and foremost, I know this comes as a surprise to nobody, but it's a corridor and not a downtown. But I think that's an important distinction to talk about very briefly, in that, when you think of a downtown, and we put the kind of the size, the relative size of downtown Brookfield over top of the corridor, and you can see the Ogden Avenue corridor is over twice the size, and also just the compactness. And so the other thing that we put on that map is that dashed red ring, which represents a quarter-mile radius, or what is kind of seen as a 5-minute walk shed. And so when you think of that ability in your downtown to park once and walk to multiple destinations, and the ability to kind of make change that's going to have a big impact because of the conciseness of the downtown, you don't have those benefits on a corridor, so you need to think about it differently. And so that, again, led us to kind of this idea for this, the toolkit. So I think that's a big piece. If we go to the next slide, another thing that we saw and learned is you've got a really broad diversity of businesses within the corridor. The different colored boxes represent the different types of uses that were surveyed. Service and automotive uses probably doesn't come as a surprise to anybody that that's the number one use in the corridor. But there is a wide range of uses. And what we found through our stakeholder interviews and our assessment is you've got some really cool businesses in the corridor. You've got some really amazing draws that draw people from the world. You talk about the arcade and the stories of people traveling great distances to come to the arcade, to the scuba shop that services people across the country, to restaurants that draw people from the region. And so I think that there's a lot of great stories. And talking with these business owners, you have people who are in love with Brookfield, are passionate about being here, having their business here, and wanting to grow it and see great things happen along Ogden Avenue. And I think that's something that we shouldn't all take for granted. I don't think we do, but it's always worth pointing out because we don't see that in every community and every corridor we go to. I think it's something special here. And just that dedication that some of these business owners have to, just picking up, trash in the community or trying to come up with new ideas to draw people into the corridor. So I think that's something that can really be capitalized on. If we go to the next slide, another thing that's really unique, and this is what our partners at SB Friedman helped point out, is that vacancies are low and stable, which is another great thing. On a corridor like this, you often see more vacancies, more turnover, and so I think that's a very positive thing to build from. And also just thinking about the corridor and the role that it plays in the community. Has the heaviest traffic volumes in the village. So you have to see that as a point of capture where people are coming through. And one of the things that we most commonly heard in our stakeholder interviews is, I can't tell when I'm on Ogden Avenue in Brookfield versus in another community. And I think that's one of the things that we want to think about and work to change, because if you can make people aware and capture them, and obviously it's a gateway into your downtown, and creating that awareness of what a special community Brookfield is, that's something that I think we can accomplish with this corridor and is important. So those were some of the things we saw with the character, and if we move on to kind of the issues and opportunities, I'm hitting these very briefly. I'm happy to answer questions and double back on anything. But from an issue standpoint, you know, aesthetics came up. You know, we heard from a lot of stakeholders. We'd love to, you know, there's parts of the corridor that just need a fresh coat of paint, you know, as a metaphor. We asked at one of the workshops, you know, how important, you know, how attractive do you think the corridor is? And generally people saw it as unattractive. And then how important is it to have it look good, and how much do you think that benefits and helps the corridor? And people thought that was very important. So aesthetics is something that we want to be thinking about and how we can help the corridor. And that comes into play in both the private side, in the business facades and the state of their parking lots and their signage, and then on the public side in terms of the streetscape and what can be done there. Then there's operational issues, and the biggest one that we really saw was access and curb cuts. And you know, if you drive the corridor, you see there's segments of the corridor where it's just what they call a rolled curb. You know, so basically cars can drive up off of Ogden Avenue onto the property for a long stretch of the roadway. And that creates safety issues. That creates sometimes parking over the sidewalk that, you know, impacts the kind of the safety and security and the comfort for pedestrians. And so that's an issue that we want to call attention to. You know, we want to think about the pedestrians and the bicyclists. You know, we met with, you know, the local bicycle group. We know that nobody's going to be biking up and down Ogden Avenue. The bicycle group doesn't see that either. You want to have good, safe places where you can cross, especially when there's school crossings as well for pedestrians. You want to have places that bikes can park and be able to kind of hit a block or two of businesses, you know, in one trip. So I think there's components of that. And then finally, parking. You know, parking is always going to be a challenge. Parking continues to be a challenge, just again because of that long linear character of the corridor. And so finding places that there can be improvements made, looking at redevelopment opportunities for creating more parking in the corridor. Again, there's not going to be that silver bullet because it's not a downtown where you can create one centralized parking lot. You want to think of those walk sheds, and so it's going to be incrementally thinking about places where we can pick up a few parking spaces, or a redevelopment happens and there can be some additional parking to support, you know, a block or two radius in each direction. So some of those are some of the issues. Now turning to the opportunities, the positives, there's a lot of good things that are going on and coming up. One, you have kind of the pending phase 1 streetscape process for Ogden Avenue, and you've got STP funds dedicated to that. So that's a huge step forward in being able to move your public sector aesthetics forward. And the fact that your staff is working hard to get funding and line up funding sources to do that is amazing. So that's a really great positive. Again, the businesses and invested stakeholders, they're out there. I think the discussion of the Economic Development Group Committee is another great way that I think you're going to be able to engage and activate those people and really leverage their passion for the community. You've got 2 tax increment finance districts, so that's a huge plus, you know, affecting the corridor and the ability to use that to leverage opportunities, and as well as your property improvement program. So I, you know, was here and heard, you know, one of, you know, a grant being given to a business. I mean, that's a great program. Again, we don't always see that in every community. I think that more effort to get people engaged and make that aware, make them aware of that opportunity is huge, because I think getting more people into that program and making use of that will start to pay dividends and seeing improvements to the private sector aesthetics and character of the corridor. And then finally, future redevelopment. I think as the corridor continues to build momentum, this will happen naturally. Obviously, the village can play a hand in it as well, but finding those right spots and those right sites to create redevelopment. We heard support from the community for mixed use, for having you know, residential above commercial uses. Obviously, what we heard from people everybody would love to see more restaurants and entertainment uses. And so I think over time, as you have, again, momentum building, Imperial Oak and other users, I think redevelopment will start to kind of build on that and bring in additional uses. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to capitalize on as part of this. So then if we go to the next part, which is kind of the tools piece, again, what we sought to do, and I think you've all seen, is to create a series of 8 toolkits, and we talked with staff about, what should those focus on? What are the different elements? And we wanted them to each be very specific, and staff really helped us to understand how, and frame those in a way that targeted multiple audiences. And so each of those toolkits kind of has a forward-facing piece, so that staff can hopefully, in the future, be able to take a few pages and share them with a property owner, share them with an interested developer, and use them to communicate what's great about the corridor, what the vision is, what some of the resources are that they can use to achieve their vision within the corridor. And then there's kind of a back-facing piece with some tools and guidance for staff and things that can be occurring behind the scenes. So we've worked to frame those that way. I'm not going to read through the whole list, but what we tried to show on the right, and this was an intentional piece, is if you think of kind of the world of tools and what can help the corridor, again, you've got private and you've got public side of things, and then you have kind of lower cost, lower effort initiatives and higher cost and higher effort initiatives. And we wanted to make sure that we were spanning a range with these. Again, you don't want to have a series of recommendations where you're just trying to hit home runs. You want to have some line drives and doubles in there to kind of balance everything out and keep things moving. And so I think that range of tools that we came up with staff's help really sets the table for different initiatives, and the ability for staff to work with the private developers, the business owners, the property owners, to help give them tools to move forward and do their share, and at the same time, on the public side, give some guidance and some form to things like the streetscape and addressing access management issues. So again, I'm happy to double back, talking specific about any of those tools, but that's really the bulk of what our recommendations are. We did provide an executive summary just to kind of give an overview of the process, and then we also provided a poster plan, the goal being that can be something that, again, can help raise awareness you can have out in the lobby, and so people coming into Village Hall or other locations that you'd want to put it up, just gives them an understanding of kind of this process and the key elements and the key findings and recommendations from this. So with that, I'll just touch a little bit on the priority actions and kind of what we're recommending. Overall, we, in the executive summary, we talked about kind of 4 major efforts. One is to support redevelopment. Obviously, if you have developers coming in and have an interest in a site, I think staff is well equipped to help with that process and help support redevelopment on the corridor. So that's always going to be a top priority. Next is enhance the public realm. So again, what can the village be doing to make this a better looking corridor and more attractive and stand apart from other segments of Ogden Avenue and really be a gateway into Brookfield. And so again, that's something that's moving forward as we speak with the phase 1 process using the STP funds. The third is to support guidance, provide support and guidance for private efforts, private development. And so, that's making sure that business owners are aware of the PIP program and understand how to access those funds. And sometimes some of those things are design-based, and a property owner, a business owner might not really understand building design or signage design. So sometimes it's helping connect those business owners with design professionals to give them a sense of what they can accomplish and do with their building or their signage. So providing that support and guidance. And the fourth one was to think about a pilot program. Again, it's a long corridor, so is there a segment that, an intense level of effort can be made, on a smaller area so that you can show the rest of the corridor, show the community, the benefits of those efforts. So those were kind of the big themes, and then the specific ones that I highlighted on the slide, again, is just, in the near term, in the next couple months, start using these toolkits and portions of these toolkits to create awareness and communicate some of these ideas and this vision to business owners and property owners. Continue to advance that streetscape program. Again, that's already underway. Consider providing those additional design resources. And so we've seen it in other communities where you actually hire an architect to do a sketch of what a facade could look like, to take somebody's business and show them, okay, here's what you can do, a few small steps to modernize and freshen up the look. Again, sometimes business owners don't even know where to start, and so we've seen that be very effective, and I think the RTA study made that recommendation as well for Ogden Avenue. And then also the final thing that in kind of the near term would be to clarify and expand funding opportunities. We talk about some things that maybe aren't expressly defined in the property improvement program. Maybe they just need to be expressly defined and clarified. We have one of our toolkits is about murals. I think that's a little bit of a gray zone. So is that something that the property improvement program would support? If so, I think that's worth clarifying. So I think there's some things there that can just, some of the gray areas that could be refined just to help make it clear to property owners and business owners, what great tools there are here and how they can use them. So those are some of the kind of immediate term actions that we've identified, I think, to help move this forward. So that's kind of the overview that I wanted to give, but ultimately I'm here to answer any questions and talk in more detail if there's anything that you would like to talk about.
Well, thank you I'll be honest, I have not been able to get through the whole document. I was traveling a bit this weekend, but I'm just impressed with how comprehensive it is and the detail and the just the visual aspects of it, some of the design suggestions and what it could look like. For me, that's very helpful, and I think your point's well taken that some of the business owners are kind of caught up in the day-to-day operation of their businesses and might not know where to go and where to start. So I think the property improvement program that we have started, I think I've always said it's a great step, and I think it's got to be a fluid program where maybe we change the parameters or what's allowed as we go forward. We have some idea what we think is needed, but I think the board's indicated they're open to expanding or changing the parameters of that program to meet needs going forward. And each time we award one of those grants, we usually see that's kind of an advertising. I mean, we've seen it happen, with the ones that we've done already where other people see it. But I want to compliment you and everyone that worked on this. And, I'm glad you mentioned at the very beginning, because when we started this, then I know Trustee Conroy raised the concern. It's like, okay, public meetings in the middle of a pandemic, but none of us knew and none of us could have ever imagined how long this was going to be going on. We couldn't necessarily put off everything based on when the pandemic might end and go forward. But I think you did an excellent job and staff did an excellent job of gathering public input and meeting with the stakeholders, the first virtual meeting. But I remember the second meeting, there was a very good turnout and crowd. And I know that's incredibly valuable to have that type of input. A lot of us up here have a lot of experience and perspective, but I think I was sitting in the back that night and I was just impressed with the variety of the type of people and stakeholders and roles in the community that we had there that night. And that's why I knew the input was going to become very valuable, because we didn't just have one group with one vision coming in. We had a lot of people. And I think some of the comments, the most valuable comments, just came from, people that we wouldn't necessarily consider, experts or major property owners. It's just their input was very helpful. So I think everything starts with the process. I think you had an excellent process. I think this is an excellent report. And I'm going to open up to the board for comments and, suggestions and ideas going forward. But, you said it also, this isn't something that we were looking to put something on the shelf saying we did this and it's done. I was impressed with the steps and the, the action plans and the ideas and even the timelines and, the steps to take. And you see some of the timelines and they talk, 5 years and 10 years. And I know, some of us, I know all of us are very impatient that we want things to move forward, but to see the realistic timeframes on some of these, I think is very important. And, the challenge, you mentioned the challenges and the opportunities in the corridor. One of the things, we have a lot of these ideas, but, it being an IDOT roadway, you mentioned the challenges of anytime you want to make an improvement along an IDOT corridor, because it's state government, there's lots of hoops and things to jump through. But it does open up funding sources also. So we're not going to change the IDOT requirements and the IDOT process, but we can use that to our benefit with the funding opportunities and planning out and realizing those types of things are going to take time. But then there's also the things that are within our control and some of the alleys in the infrastructure improvements and signage and changes in our code that, we're not helpless in this. We can do some of this without IDOT's help and go forward. So just wanted to thank you. And, at this point, I'll open up to the board. I know we get this material. It's a very comprehensive document. I know everyone wants to go through in a lot of detail, but if there's any comments or ideas or anything you want to throw out tonight or suggested next steps, I'll open it up to the board now. So.
One question I just had, in your interaction with the businesses as you went through this process, did you get a feel for how, percentage-wise, roughly, how many of these businesses own the property that they're in versus lease? Is it more than typical?
No, I think it was probably in a typical range. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a real hard number. We didn't collect that data, but. Okay,
because I'm the liaison of the Chamber of Commerce, and that property improvement program is something that they've thrown out there repeatedly. It's free money, and it's shocking. I mean, and we're not getting a lot. I don't know if we have anyone from Ogden Avenue even participate yet in that. I mean, everyone else there's other businesses that have. They're mainly in the downtown Brookfield area or the Broadway business district, but nothing on Ogden. And it's challenging also to get them to participate in chamber functions, which for some reason that Ogden corridor is just and I don't understand why that would. I was thinking perhaps because maybe there are leased spaces and the proprietor doesn't want to invest, but the business owner may. But I didn't know if that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's a good question, but I mean, I think that sometimes it's just an awareness, and I think that, we did get a sense from talking to, some business owners, a little bit of a disconnect, from the community. We did talk about if they were involved in the chamber, and there were some. I remember talking to the Sherwin-Williams manager, and I think he's been involved at times with the chamber and others who were involved, and then I think some just kind of head down. Keep working. And so I think that is some of the challenge. And again, if it's a EDC or staff, just, getting out and putting a little bit of extra effort into creating some awareness, and hopefully that'll help.
And in that same light, this document that you create, I mean, like I said, visually it's very helpful, and there's some, what could be and what it looks like. I think, sharing this with the business owners on Ogden, I think everyone should see this in its final form, make it available to them, whether electronically or copies of it, so they can see it, because, and it's done very tastefully. It's, even pointing out places where, it's, okay, this could be better. I don't think it's, taken as an attack or anything else like this. A lot of this was designed a long time ago, but I think some business owners might be helped with the visual aspect. And I think you raised an excellent point about maybe just providing them access or ideas to who could help them with the design of their, potential facade improvement and signs. I think, sometimes business owners just caught up in the day-to-day operations and don't think, well, I don't know anyone, I don't know how to do this. But when they see what could happen and what could be done and that there is money available, that could be the next step. So I'm sorry, Trustee Kenner, I didn't want to cut you off if you got more.
No, I just. Okay.
And I think the streetscape project is going to be huge as well, because again, you want to build up that momentum, you want to build up that feeling that this is a special place. And I think, having some public investment, and some streetscape elements is going to help lift that up and create that feeling. And we've seen it in other communities where we've worked on streetscape projects, and we've tracked kind of the level of private investment, and it usually goes up after that public investment.
And your comment that, people didn't, realize, okay, I'm on Ogden and Brookfield, that's a very telling comment. So, the uniformity of, landscaping and streetscaping, creating a setting that lets you know you're in Brookfield. That kind of point is very well taken. I think they're, it's right, and that's something within our realm that we can do going forward, so. Other,
I just wanted to thank you for the proposal. I've been really excited to see it. And, the toolkits especially, I know that's when you submitted your proposal and we selected you guys to work with to begin with, that was a big selling point, where these actionable items, kind of bite-sized pieces that, we could take on over time, as well as a larger vision. So I'm excited to see that come to reality, and excited for the staff and the commissions and our new commission to be able to take these pieces and work on them over time, and not have it be such a big, overwhelming document, but these kind of, tangible items that we can take on. So thank you for coming through with that from the initial proposal. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Was, in the document, it talked about, and you brought it up with the rolling curbs that allowed people to park up on the curb. Was there much discussion at those meetings, or much feedback on how we would compensate for that loss of parking? Because that's how it is being used.
Yeah, I think, one thing is we did ask in one of the survey questions where people park. And it was a smaller number. Most people, park in lots that are on the property, so not kind of coming in off of the road, or on the side streets. And it was a much smaller percentage of people who were kind of parking on Ogden Avenue is what we were referring to. So it's not a huge number. I think where it's going to be a challenge, and this is a process that's going to play out through the IDOT phase 1 process and to phase 2, is that there are businesses that's kind of, from an auto repair shop perspective, that's where they kind of tee up their cars and, and sometimes put them out for people at the end of the day to pick up. And so I think operationally there are probably a few businesses that it's going to be a very large challenge for them to stay in operation if that was to go away. And so that's something that the process will need to work through and kind of work with those businesses and understand very detailed their operation before you come and do any streetscape, because IDOT is going to want to reduce those and remove cut it down to just 1 or 2 curb cuts per block face. So I think that might be the bigger issue is kind of working with those 2, maybe 3 businesses that it really would impact to lose. I think from a parking standpoint, the couple businesses that I think of that have a couple, 2, 3 spaces, I think that there's ways that can be accommodated through, there's a few side streets that haven't gone to angled parking yet. And then also as redevelopment occurs, looking for opportunities where, if redevelopment occurs across a couple different parcels, being very efficient with how that is laid out and getting efficient parking spaces. So we did some site planning concepts during the process and found, examples of how that could work, where you could, 2 lots next to each other, if you can get them to agree to, a cross-access easement. Between the 2 of them, you can design a parking lot that, increases their parking by 10%. And so finding places like that where we can just pick up a few spaces here and there, again, that corridor relative to a downtown, I think that's going to be the long-term success story, is just finding a few spaces here and there throughout the corridor to support the businesses.
Was there a desire to have more standalone businesses where they would have their own parking lots, or increased density?
In terms of the
future of Ogden, just would you increase the density of storefronts? Was that a feeling that people were getting? Because I'm looking at some of the pictures in there, and it looks like it's nice walking. You can storefront,
Right.
storefront.
I think you can actually have both to a certain extent. I think that you have a unique situation on Ogden where there are a lot of businesses that are set back, an extra 20 feet from the right of way. Some of those have done nice landscaping. Some of them are just kind of lawns. I think over time as redevelopment happens, the preferred orientation is to have those businesses up on the street, to create that pedestrian environment, and then parking on the sides and back of those buildings. So you can have that frontage, you can put density above in terms of other uses, and then configure the lot in a way that you are kind of maximizing the parking on the sides and back, using the alleys in a smart way. So I think that there's ways that you can move towards having your cake and eating it
And there
too.
was negative feedback on adding parking to Ogden, like diagonal parking, because there's such wide walkways already.
Yeah, I mean, one, I think just from the IDOT perspective, I don't think that they would allow it. I think that, the goals of pedestrian safety and mobility kind of make that so having parking off of Ogden, other than having, a drive, a curb cut that leads into a parking lot, but having it, right along the sidewalk, between, just in a tight condition between the building and the sidewalk where you only have like 20 feet.
And
there
I'm
was
sure
not
the
support for
traffic
that.
flow issues there, backing
Right.
out
I
of
mean,
those.
it would be similar to what you have on Roosevelt going through like Berwyn, et cetera, where they have parking on the sides. But I was just thinking, because if you were to increase the density or have residential on top of the businesses, they have to park somewhere
Right.
and not down the street and block in.
Right, no, and in those schemes, we did, again, test out some sites for redevelopment. Again, the state of retail is changing, and so retail storefronts generally are smaller than they were historically. And so, you might have a narrow retail frontage and then in-building parking that's underneath the residential, and then surface parking adjacent to that. So there's ways that, again, with a reasonable building footprint, we did some examples to show how, sites could redevelop. You could park the site, per code, and still have a retail component, and then, add some vibrancy through residences above. So I think there's ways to achieve that. But again, that'll be through redevelopment process and the village working with potential redevelopers, and understanding how to maximize their sites and kind of meet those visions and goals.
I am glad that you brought up murals, because that came out during the sign code a couple of years ago that I wanted to keep. I wanted murals, and I look forward to voting that back into existence.
Good deal.
Did you by chance meet with Doc at
Yep.
Galloping Ghost? Did you show him the murals that you had? Just wonder if he had seen these.
Yeah, I think I did. I met with him before the second workshop where we unveiled it, and I told him we were working on it. Yeah, that's a good, I think I did, but that was a while ago. I can always make sure that he saw it.
I was just wondering if he saw how it was reaction. 'Cause I think it would look really neat.
Yeah, and I mean, I think those are just, again, the things, like, I've been taking my family for 5-6 years, to Galloping Ghost, and, the first time we're just like, wait, where is it? And to kind of have something that really calls attention to it could be really cool.
Sure.
Back to the parking point that Trustee Cote raised, I mean, I think I know staff is looking, and, one of the, even it seems very small incremental steps, the spots that we added over Grove and Forest, just looking for those opportunities when we're doing street work or construction work to add 2 or 3 spaces here by design standards, the way we design the street and the parking. I think those things are key. And then we have to work at the depth of the lot, or look at the depth of the lot. I remember years ago when we were designing the TIF district, if you look at the borders of the TIF district, it's not a straight line, just every property on Ogden Avenue. There's certain areas where it juts out deeper into the residential area where there was possible areas for expansion, because when we talked about, you don't realize when you're in Brookfield on Ogden Avenue, if you compare Ogden's other stretches of Ogden Avenue, one of the main things is the depth of the lot, so how far the lots go back. I mean, we have residential directly backing up on a lot of Ogden Avenue, but there's some areas where it's deeper, and there's some sites for potential redevelopment, and the village possibly acquiring property for expansion of, parking in that direction is a possibility, because we created that TIF district. So years ago when we did that, those were the things that we envisioned, the possibility of expanding the footprint of what you consider actually Ogden Avenue, looking for opportunities. So I know staff's going to continue to look at those opportunities to expand the parking incrementally there, so.
I'd like to thank you. This is really thorough and well done. I am eager, for one, to see these streetscape ideas come to fruition and be implemented. I think it works together really well with the economic development plan. And like that, I think it would be useful to periodically revisit this at board meetings to get updates on some of the successes that maybe we're having in implementing this. It would be nice to see. But thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just mention that part of our scope, you know, one, we did recommend some metrics to keep track of in each of these so that, you know, again, this is a work in progress and we want it to be a living document. And so to be able to revisit and see where there are successes and maybe the things that can be tweaked. And then we'll follow up in a year. That was part of our scope. And sit down with staff and kind of talk through what's worked and what hasn't and make some recommendations maybe on what could be tweaked. So, you know, we do want this to be a set of living documents that, you know, that if something just isn't quite working and can be fine-tuned and work better, then, you know, we're here to help and make sure that, you know, things move forward in a positive direction. So thanks.
That's great.
As I indicated, this document great to get to every, you know, business owner on Ogden, every property owner on Ogden, and obviously going to be required reading material for all the new members of the Economic Development Commission and, you know, going forward. But in terms of steps with the board, I mean, is this something that we would formally adopt at a meeting? Okay. And so what I'd ask is, just because I don't know how much, if the board got to review everything in all the documents, you know, give it a, maybe the first meeting in June, is that when you're looking to adopt this, or?
Sounds good.
I mean, if you think everybody will have a chance to go through, because I mean, if there's anything that strikes your eye, at least do you want to talk about to possibly change or add or clarify within the document before we formally adopt it, knowing that throughout it's going to be a living, breathing document, we can amend it or move forward with it, but before we formally adopt it, if there's anything that you have questions about or want to change or clarify.
Well, there's certain recommendations or supplements to current policy. So by adopting that, I mean, they're making recommendations that we supplement policies with guidelines that may even contradict. So I mean, there may be more to, if you adopt this, it could.
Well, I think that you know, by adopting it, you're not actually changing any ordinances. It's indicating to staff that it's the board's making a policy decision that we want to discuss the future changes and recommendations. I don't think you're overruling any ordinances or current processes by just adopting the plan. I think
Right. This is not a code amendment. This is not a ordinance. This is a plan. And then President Garvey is exactly right. If you adopt the plan, the board adopts the plan, it's our job then as staff to come back through our process if there's going to be a change in parking requirements or signage requirements or whatever. We'll have to go back to the planning commission, come back to the village board through a code amendment process. That's the only way that anything in the plan becomes law in the village of Brookfield.
I could see this plan becoming the starting point or generating point for the agendas for the Brookfield Economic Development Commission and the Planning and Zoning Commission. There's going to be steps that staff will bring items to them to implement what, you know, the board's general policy decision is to adopt this, and then the processes to amend these will come forward from them. So this will generate a lot of activity for the newly created Economic Development Commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, even for this board. Some of these things might come directly to this board to implement and change our codes and ordinances so we can, you know, take these steps. And some of them are bigger scale things where they're not necessarily changing ordinances. It's the way we review things or look at things or, you know, what our goals are for the district and the, you know, the action plan and items. So some of it's going to be staff items and some of it's going to be board action going forward. But that's why I said at the very beginning, I'm impressed with how comprehensive it is, and yet it gets into the detail of, you know, steps that can be taken over time and in almost, you know, an order of steps that can be taken and the things that we can do right away. And knowing that things can change. I mean, there could be, you know, one major development that changes everything for a section. You know, you talked about, you know, identifying specific sections of the corridor to target. We may plan on working on a specific section of the corridor, then we may have a developer come forward and say, I'm interested in this, and it will change our focus, and we'll have to shift and pivot and kind of focus on that area and go forward. And then, you know, other opportunities that pop up, whether they be, you know, IDOT grants or other grants or private development that we can do going forward. But I know there's excitement from the board about the streetscape and other design things that we can do within our, you know, within our abilities, and, you know, the property improvement program, you know, just getting that out there, so if we want to, I'm just asking the board, do you feel comfortable if we put this up for adoption at the first meeting in June? That would be the June 13th meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
being
It's
here
really
tonight.
been
Thank you for the document.
It's been a
Emily,
pleasure
thank you
working
for
with
all
your
your work.
staff.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
So, thanks so much.
Okay, the second item we have up for discussion is related to the lead water service replacement program funding policy. Doug, you're gonna tell us how we're gonna pay for all this?
Well, we actually have started paying for this. This is just a policy that will direct the board and future boards on what the intention of this rate adjustment was, in hopes that somewhere down the line, the boards don't go astray and use this money for other purposes.
Or staff.
Or staff,
Yeah.
or staff. So really, why are we bringing forth the lead water service replacement program funding policy, and why does it have such a long name? It's a 20-year program. Remember, we had talked about how long this program is going to be, and we want to make sure that over the years, as the boards change and staff changes, that we know that this rate adjustment that the board did goes to where it is intended to be. And we want to keep track of that money. We want to keep track of that dollar, whatever it is. I'll go through this first. So just a timeline. On April 18th, staff brought forth the purpose of the rate adjustment, why we had to look at what we were going to do about the lead line, the private portion of the lead line, and how we were going to replace those in compliance with state law. The board determined that it was in the best interest of the village that we would support, that the board would support, the village would support the cost of exchanging out the private portion of the lead service line. And so as a result, on the last board meeting on May 9th, an ordinance was passed authorizing an increase in the rate. So the next slide, please. So this is really how the water rate works at this point in time, after that ordinance was passed. The total rate per 1,000 gallons is $15.78 per 1,000 gallons. The first four items there are really related to the actual operations of the water fund itself. The water supply, the cost of water from, excuse me, the Brookfield North Riverside Water Commission, the recovery cost, which covers the cost of any lost water, equipment maintenance, and operational costs. Those pretty much cover the cost of the day-to-day running of the water fund. The next two line items, the capital improvement cost at 352, that funds long-term water main replacements. It maintains the system itself from the point of the water coming into the system, the water towers, the reservoir, and all of that. And that's where that $3.52 comes from. And if you'll remember back in September of 21, we did adjust that rate to formulate a plan that would go ahead and put forth a good maintenance plan for our water system. So that $1.66, it's a 14% increase. It is there for a specific purpose. It is there for replacement of the private portion of the lead service line. We don't want to lose track of that. We want to make sure that going forward, any rate adjustment for any of the other components goes specifically to that, but we want to make sure that we keep track of where and what that $1.66 is. If it needs to go up, it might have to go up. But of course, if it has to go down because we get grants, and we're going to be looking at grants, we can possibly look at reducing that rate. So the next slide, please. So that this is the reason for what we're doing the lead water service replacement program funding policy for. And those are the 4 reasons which I kind of went over here in this conversation. And then the last slide, this is what the staff recommendation is: approval of a lead water service line replacement program funding policy which will ensure future accumulation of revenues to be used for replacement of the private portion of the lead service lines. And basically, that's what we have going on here. And we just want to make sure, again, as Tim reiterated, that staff and board are all on the same page as to what we're going to do with this extra rate increase adjustment that we did at the last board meeting. Are there any questions?
The only thing I would add, and just simplify it, nothing that he's just presented tonight is a change. It just memorializes and confirms and solidifies a very significant policy decision the board made at the last meeting, and that's all we're doing. And yes, it ties the board to this, but more importantly, it ties staff to this. And 20 years from now, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be your village manager, and Doug will not be your finance director. Maybe George will be. Somebody needs to, you need to have these legacies, and you need to have understandings so that the people that are in our seats 20 years from now don't sit there and say, well, boy, I could do a lot with $1.60, whatever it may be. This just ties us all together and weds us together until a board in the future could potentially change that.
And I think this is sort of similar to when we created the reserve policy, where we created it years ago, and we said, and our goal was to get the cushion in there for the appropriate number of months, but we created a specific process for money being taken out of it. It's akin to that, but it's not the same thing. But I like the annual review by the finance department and to present the findings to the board. I think that should be a formal step. There should be a regular calendar for that, where whether it's 1 year from the implementation of the rate, so it's, this month of every year, the finance director will report to the village board the status of the, revenues taken in by the water rates and how they were expended and the balance and things like this. I think it should be a, formal process. I mean, the language in there now is annual. The finance department will review the rates charged to the system to determine any changes which need to be made, and will present its finding to the board of trustees. I'd almost rather make that even more specific, that it's, reviewed and presented, in a specific month out of the year, and, it's almost like an audit of that fund. And I think that's your intention, while you're here, Doug, is to come forward and say, okay, here's what you approved, here's what I've done with it, and I've stayed within the parameters of what was anticipated. And then we put this in place, and then, we can say this is creating a legacy, but, future boards could come in and change this. I mean, a majority of a new board can say, you know what, we want to spend the water rate increase that was put in by the board in 2022 in a different way, but it would at least require them to take the steps of formally discussing and voting, explaining why they want to do it, and they need to explain to the residents and the owners, the residents in the village, why they are changing it. So I think it's that kind of putting it in paper so people, realize, okay, this is why it's put in place. And if a future board, a majority, or the entire board decides we want to do something different, we wouldn't be able to stop them, but at least they'd have to vote on it and explain why they were doing it. Because, we've asked the residents for money in the past. We've, with the street referendum money, we built a level of trust. We asked them for the $22 million, and we delivered on that and spent the money the way we were supposed to. And I think that's the key to people understanding what this money's going for, is that we're responsible with it, we're transparent with what it's going for, and that it's not going to be used on something else. So I really appreciate the board, the staff bringing this to the board, so it's a way to kind of put it down in writing. This is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. And if a future board decides that we were wrong, they could do it different, but they'll have to vote on it and explain it.
Doug, could you go back to the slide there? So how does the sewer rate play into here? Because is that what it's called on our water bill?
So the
That's
sewer
the
rate,
percentage of the water.
right,
rate.
it's still going to be 0.271% of the 1578. So that money, so the sewer rate is 27.1% of a total gross water charge, which includes the entire line item there.
So now that's 27% of a much larger amount, though.
Right.
Right. So where
Which is
does
all
it-
going towards sewer, replacement. It pays for the $300,000 televising. It pays for the portion of the sewer mitigation, the program that we're just starting up. So that money is earmarked specifically for sewer.
But it is a much larger amount.
It is. It's 27.1% of additional 1.66, so.
That was it.
And as we get the annual, I mean, we know we're going to get annual increases from the North Riverside Water Commission, who's going to get them from the city of Chicago. So,
Right.
you know, the rate that we're asking for the lead service line replacement is this, but every year we're going to get.
That was really where I was intending to bring forth a review of the entire rate structures every year
Right.
annually when the Water Commission increases their rate, go through it again with the board, tell them where we're at.
And I think that's important. I believe me, we all have water bills. We all get them, and we all understand when people, you know, we raised our own water bills when we did this, and we have to pay them too. But I think, and it's not for lack of trying or lack of seeking. It's complicated to understand your water bill and where it's at. We're certain fixed costs. We get them. I mean, we get our water from the Brookfield North Riverside Water Commission, who gets it from the city of Chicago. So it's, you know, we don't have really anywhere else to go for water. So those kind of costs are kind of fixed and kind of tied. We don't have a lot of say. And as much talk as there was, you know, policy talks about the city of Chicago not increasing their rates more than a certain amount. I'm still very, very afraid of that the city of Chicago, when they're in their annual budget crisis problem, will always look to an additional revenue source, increasing the water rates to the people they sell water to, which would be the commission, which would then be passed on to us. But those things are beyond our control. So we always have to realize that there's certain parts of the water bill we're not going to be able to control. But we voted on this, and I know when each of the board members voted on this, they intended that this increase would go to this, you know, other mandate that we received from the state to replace these, you know, lead water services. And it's key that we do that. I mean, when I said it's an unfunded mandate, I'm not saying that I don't think it's a good idea to replace the lead service lines, but I just think the state putting it all on us without offering us a true fixed funding source, this theory that there's going to be grant money available, but no one can tell us how much each year and for how many years it's going to be available, it does create an unfunded mandate for us, and we have to do it. So it plays into a lot of the other things that we do and can't do because of this. You know, I know earlier tonight there was a discussion about, you know, alley paving, and you know, every time it rains, alley paving is a big discussion and needs to. And I've wanted to pave all the alleys for years, but I consider it somewhat of a luxury in light of the fact that we have to replace the 100-year-old water mains first. We have to replace the lead water service lines first. It might not be as attractive and visible as alleys, but it's a public safety concern, so we have to focus on this. Okay. Questions or comments from the board about the policy?
I think this policy, it establishes a kind of accountability, and I appreciate that. It's a responsible step, so thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are we, I mean, is it okay to put that more specific language in there about a specific time or for the report, and just, you know, maybe make that language a little, I mean, because I know it's worded in a way that they, you know, the finance department will present its finding to the Board of Trustees. I just, you know, Doug's very organized around, but, you know, future finance director, well, I'll tell the board about it sometime, or I'll send an email. I think it should be a formal report to the board, you know, committee item or an annual report to the board at a specific, you know, month or time of year where, you know, it's formally talked about and discussed. So that's the only thing I'd like to see more specific in there, so.
Well, Doug's not leaving until all the lead's replaced anyway. So
Okay, Doug, thank you very much for bringing it forward.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank
So we'll
you.
put this up at the June 13th meeting? Is that the,
Yep, for the first meeting in June?
I think that is the first meeting in June 13th?
June 13th, and there you go.
I think that's right.
That's the second meeting in May already.
Okay. All right, so at this point, those are the items we had under regular business. Seeing that there's no one on my right side, I won't ask them for any public comments. Is there anyone on my left side that would like to make any public comment? Okay, seeing none, there is no need for executive session tonight. So I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole meeting at 8:19 PM.
So moved.
Second.
The motion was made by trustee Conroy, seconded by trustee Hendricks. Roll call, please.
Trustee Ketchler.
Aye.
Trustee Cote.
Aye.
Trustee Hendricks.
Aye.
Trustee Conroy.
Aye.
Trustee Leclerc.
Aye.
Trustee Kaluzny.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, we're adjourned at 8:19 PM. Thank you for coming.